If you tell anyone, I'll say you were the one who asked me into your bed." That's what he whispered to me, with that stinking breath of cheap wine and a smile that made my stomach turn. "My name is Thelma Irene Pickens. I'm 79 years old and I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. And if you think you know what fear is, maybe you need to hear what I'm about to tell you, because the fear I lived with didn't make noise. It walked slowly down the hallway, waited for the rain to start, and knocked on my bedroom door with the softest voice you can imagine. Scared of the thunder, girl? He used to ask. But it wasn't the sky trembling. It was me. I was 12 when my mother married him. Leonard, a man who looked decent in front of others. Baptist church pastor, always smiling, always carrying his Bible under his arm. Said he'd been widowed young, said he wanted a family again, and my mother, poor thing, believed it. She'd been a widow nearly 5 years, with no one to help her, thought God was sending her a blessing. But no blessing walks through the door looking at a child the way he looked at me. The first night he slept in my room was during a storm. I still remember my mom saying, "Go check if little Thelma's scared. She's never liked thunder." And he went, calm as ever, saying he'd just stay there for a bit in the corner until I fell asleep. Brought a pillow and laid down on the floor. But the floor was only until the house lights went out. Then he'd get up, come slowly, and sit on the edge of my bed. That first night, he just touched my arm, pretended it was affection. "To soothe you," he said. I froze like wood. I didn't know if it was right or wrong. I just knew it gave me a sickening shiver. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling all night, counting thunderclaps and begging for daylight. When morning came, he was back on the floor, and my mother walked in all cheerful. "Slept better, honey?" I just nodded. Because in that house, you learn real early not to say what you feel. Leonard started doing it every time it rained. Then, even without rain, he came up with excuses. Said the house made noises at night, that it wasn't safe, that he wanted to protect me. And my mother believed him. Believed because she wanted to believe. Because closing your eyes is easier than facing what's right in front of you. I tried telling once. Whispered to my cousin during a quick moment at the town fair. Her eyes widened, but she stayed silent. After that, my mom pulled me aside. "What are you saying about Leonard around town? He's a man of God. You should be ashamed." That's when I understood. No one would hear me. If I screamed, it'd be worse. So I stayed quiet. But the body doesn't stay quiet, does it? I started getting sick. Nausea, headaches, fever that came and went. My teacher kept sending me home. Leonard said it was girl nerves. One day, I fainted in class and they took me to the doctor. But there was nothing wrong, apparently. "Just weakness," he said. "Must be her age." I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself anymore. I felt dirty. I felt wrong. And I still had to sit through Sunday sermons, hearing Leonard preach about purity being a woman's greatest gift. He'd look right at me when he said it, and I'd shrink into the pew, dying inside. My mother, she changed too, got colder, distant. I think she knew, but in that way people know, without letting themselves admit it. And me? I learned to hide, to smile when expected, to pretend I was fine. But the more I pretended, the more I sank. Then came summer, and with it, the church camps. That's when everything started to shift. Because at camp, far from him, I slept. I ate, I laughed. I saw what it felt like to live without carrying that weight on my back. That's where I met Clara, a girl my age, but braver than I ever was. She said what she thought, never looked down. One day she asked me, "Why do you always walk staring at the ground?" I didn't know how to answer. The last night of camp, Clara pulled me into the bonfire circle and said, "Come on, Thelma, sing with us. Your voice is pretty." I sang, scared, embarrassed, but I sang. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I slept in peace. No footsteps, no smell of his cheap cigarette on my blanket, but camp ends. And when I came back, he was waiting on the porch with that smile. "Had fun, little lady?" I just said yes, and he squeezed my shoulder. Well, time to get back to the routine. The way he said routine made my skin crawl. That night, I didn't sleep. He didn't come either. But I knew it was just a matter of time, and inside me, something started growing. Anger, fire, because I had tasted a drop of freedom. And now I knew how much he stole from me every time he stepped into that room. If you made it this far, go ahead and leave your like, sweetheart, because what comes next, you'll have to hear it to believe it. I wish I could tell you that the worst had already passed, that after that summer, after feeling what it was like to sleep through the night without holding my breath, things changed. But no, they got worse. When school started again, Leonard began coming into my room more often. No more pretending it was about thunderstorms. Sometimes it was just because my mother was in a night shift. She had picked up cleaning jobs at the hospital to help with bills. I think deep down, she knew exactly what that extra money was costing, but she never asked, never looked too closely. Leonard had this way of acting like everything was normal. He'd compliment my grades at dinner, brag about me at church, say I was growing into a fine young lady, and then, a few hours later, he'd push my door open with that same mouth, whispering things that made my stomach twist. I would stare at the ceiling and imagine I was somewhere else, anywhere else. I'd count the cracks in the paint or recite Bible verses in my head. Sometimes I'd just leave my body altogether, float far away, where his hands couldn't reach. One night he brought me a necklace, a little gold cross on a chain. Said it was for being such a good girl. I didn't want it, but I didn't say no. He clipped it around my neck himself, his fingers brushing the back of my skin in a way that made my entire spine tighten. I wore it because I didn't know what would happen if I refused, and because I knew my mother would see it and smile, and that would save me from another question. At school, I stopped talking much. My teacher started asking if everything was okay at home. I gave the same answer every time. Yes, ma'am. I had learned early that the more you say, the more people get nervous. Nervous people stop listening. Clara noticed, though. She asked once during lunch, "Your stepdad gives me the creeps," she said, just like that, straight out. I dropped my fork and stared at her. "What?" I managed. She just shrugged. "He looks at you weird. Like not how a stepdad's supposed to look at a girl. I don't like it." My whole body froze. No one had ever said it out loud before. Not even me. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because Leonard came. He didn't. But because someone else knew. It should have made me feel better, but it didn't. It made me feel exposed. Like he was going to find out someone had noticed and punish me for it. Weeks went by. Clara stopped asking. Maybe she figured I didn't want to talk. Maybe she was scared too. I don't blame her. I started counting down the days to the next church camp, the next escape, but that was months away. One Saturday afternoon, Mama had to go help a neighbor who'd broken her leg. She told Leonard to watch over me, like I was some toddler who couldn't be trusted on my own. I was in the kitchen doing homework when he walked in, quiet like always. He leaned against the doorframe and watched me. I kept my head down, my pencil trembling in my hand. "You're looking more like your mama every day," he said. I didn't answer. He took a step forward. "You know what happens when women start looking like women? Men notice." My stomach flipped. I stood up fast, knocking the chair over behind me. He laughed, like I was amusing. "Easy now. I was just talking," he said, grinning. But I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't just talking. After that, I started hiding things under my bed. A knife, a small hammer, even a broken piece of mirror. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but it felt better to know they were there, just in case, because something was changing in me. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. Not all the time. Sometimes, when he looked at me that way, I felt something else boiling under my skin. Not fear, fury. Around that same time, Mama got sick. Nothing serious at first, just some cough that wouldn't go away. She thought it was allergies, but she got weaker, started sleeping more, missing work. Leonard played the role of the good husband, brought her soup, read the Bible aloud, but the moment her door closed, he'd turn and look at me like I owed him something for every spoonful he gave her. One night, when Mama had taken cough syrup and was fast asleep, he came to my room and locked the door behind him. I was sitting on my bed holding the necklace he gave me. He walked toward me like he owned the air in the room. "You know you're special, right?" he said. I didn't answer. He knelt in front of me, reached for my hand, and that's when something cracked. I looked him straight in the eye and whispered, "If you touch me again, I'll kill you in your sleep." His smile faltered, just for a second. Then he laughed, like it was a joke. "What did you say?" I stood up, pushed past him. You heard me. I thought he'd hit me, or worse, but he didn't. He just stared, silent, like he was trying to figure out who I had become. That night, he didn't come back, but I didn't sleep either, because now I had crossed a line, and once you cross it, there's no going back. I didn't tell anyone what I said that night, not because I was afraid he'd follow through on some revenge. Not anymore. I stayed quiet because something inside me was still buzzing. Not fear, not shame. It was something colder. He hadn't touched me that night. That alone was enough proof for me. Words had power, and I had just discovered mine. But the house didn't change. Leonard still walked around like king of the land, still read out loud from the pulpit every Sunday, like nothing in this world could shake him. Mama kept getting thinner, coughing more, falling asleep in the middle of conversations. I started doing most of the cooking. Leonard said it was good for me, training for womanhood. I kept my mouth shut, but in my head I imagined pouring hot oil on his hands every time he reached for the biscuits. At school, my grades started climbing. Maybe because I threw myself into the books, like they were some kind of tunnel out of hell. Clara noticed. One day, after class, she said, "You've been different lately, stronger." I shrugged. Maybe I just got tired of pretending. She nodded like she understood, but we didn't talk about it more. Not directly. I think she knew if she pushed, I'd shut down again. I was already learning how to carry secrets without them leaking from my face. One evening, Mama collapsed while folding laundry. I was the one who found her. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, and her breathing rattled like dry leaves. I screamed for Leonard. He came running, and for a second, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, not of me, of losing her. We took her to the hospital. They kept her for days. Diagnosed her with something I couldn't pronounce back then. Just knew it meant weakness, medicine, and long hours of waiting. Leonard stayed by her side like some devoted husband. But the second we got home and the door clicked shut, he went back to watching me. He didn't come to my room again. Not right away. But he started showing up in new ways. Leaning against the bathroom door while I brushed my teeth. Standing too close in the kitchen. Giving me little gifts, a ribbon for my hair, a book he said reminded him of me. I took them all and locked them in a box under my bed, untouched, like relics from a war I hadn't chosen to fight. One night, after Mama had fallen asleep on the couch, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I was in bed pretending to sleep. The doorknob turned. My heart pounded. I reached for the hammer I kept under the pillow. But it wasn't Leonard. It was Mama. She looked at me, her face pale under the hallway light, and whispered, "You awake?" I nodded, sitting up slowly. She walked in, closed the door, and sat at the edge of the bed. Her eyes were glassy, tired, like she hadn't slept in 100 years. "I used to be like you," she said, "before your father died." I didn't know what she meant. "He didn't talk much," she continued, "but he never made me feel small. Leonard's different. I know that now." She looked straight at me, and I felt my throat tighten. "I should have asked you. I should have seen it sooner." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced them back. She didn't say the words, not the real ones, but she knew, and I knew she knew. That night, we made a plan. Mama wasn't strong enough to leave immediately. She had no money of her own, no place to go. Everything was in Leonard's name, the house, the car, even the bank account. But she started hiding cash from her hospital cleaning shifts. Little by little, I took on more chores without complaint. We started saving in silence, a rebellion disguised as daily life. Leonard noticed the shift. He started questioning everything. "Why are you smiling so much? What's with all the whispering between you two?" He grew suspicious, pacing the house like a dog smelling smoke. I kept my face neutral, voice soft, never giving him more than one-word answers. Mama acted like nothing was wrong, but behind her tired eyes, I saw something new, determination. A month later, we had enough for a bus ticket. One. That's all we could afford. Mama insisted I take it. Said she'd follow once she figured out a way to sell the sewing machine without Leonard noticing. I didn't argue. I couldn't. She handed me the ticket wrapped in an old sock and kissed my forehead like she used to when I was little. The night before I was supposed to leave, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made my skin crawl. At one point, I thought I heard Leonard talking on the phone, whispering. But when I crept out of bed, the hallway was empty. I went back to my room, sat on the floor and opened the box under my bed. The necklace, the ribbon, the book. I took each item out, one by one, and stared at them like they were pieces of someone else's story. I wanted to burn them, but instead I packed them in a small bag. Proof. Not for anyone else, for me, to never forget. I barely slept that night. Just watched the window as the sky slowly turned from black to grey. At 5 a.m, Mama woke me. No words, just a nod. I grabbed my bag and followed her to the back door. But when we opened it, Leonard was standing there. He didn't look angry. He looked ready. He stood there like he'd been waiting for hours. Not a sound around us. Just the creaking of the porch woo. I stepped in front of her without thinking. The bag in my hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Leonard looked at me, then down at the bag, then back up, eyes colder than I'd ever seen. "Going somewhere?" he asked, voice calm, almost amused. I didn't answer. I just stared back. He took a step forward. "I asked you a question." Mama's voice cracked behind me. "Let her go, Leonard." His eyes flicked to her. He didn't laugh. He didn't shout. He just looked. That was worse somehow, like he was calculating how far he could push without leaving marks. "After everything I did for this family," he muttered. "This is what I get?" No one said a word. He stepped closer. The space between us shrank. I felt my fingers tighten around the strap of my bag. Then something strange happened. He smiled. Not that fake church smile. Not the one he used on neighbors or people at the grocery store. This one was different. Crooked. Mean. Almost proud. "You think you're ready to walk out into the world, little girl?" he said. "You think they're gonna believe you? You think anyone out there gives a damn about a spoiled, ungrateful brat who lies about her stepfather?" Mama moved to my side, slowly, like she was trying not to startle a wild animal. Her hand found mine. "We're done," she whispered. He stepped back, just slightly. His smile faded. "This ain't over," he said, and turned his back. We didn't run. We couldn't. We stood there until the screen door slammed shut behind him. Then Mama shoved me gently toward the woods. "Go. Don't stop walking until you see the old highway. The bus stops 2 miles down." I wanted to argue, to stay, to fight for her, but I couldn't. We both knew there might not be another chance. I nodded and started running. Branches scratched my arms. My shoes got stuck in the mud. Every rustle made my heart jump. I kept seeing Leonard behind every tree, but I didn't stop. Not until I reached that broken wooden bench by the highway, the one we used to drive past every Sunday. I collapsed on it, lungs burning, bag clutched to my chest like it was the only thing keeping me real. The bus came 20 minutes later. I got on without looking back. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I stayed with Clara's aunt, Miss Louise, a stout, sharp-tongued woman who smelled like peppermint and didn't ask many questions. Clara had told her just enough for her to say yes. I slept in her guest room, helped around the house, and waited. Waited for Mama's signal, for the letter she promised to send when it was safe. But nothing came. No call, no letter, not even a whisper. I started pacing at night. Miss Louise would catch me sometimes and hand me tea without a word. I could tell she knew more than she let on, but she let me have my silence. 2 weeks turned into a month, then 2. Finally, a letter arrived. Not from Mama, from the hospital. She'd been admitted. Pneumonia, they said. Complications. No visitors except immediate family. I read the letter 3 times before Miss Louise took it from my hands. She drove me there the next morning. The nurse at the front desk looked at me with sympathy when I said my mother's name. That was the first sign something was wrong. Mama was thinner than ever. Her eyes fluttered open when I took her hand, but she didn't speak. I sat by her bed for hours, just holding on, whispering things I should have said a long time ago. That night, she died. I didn't cry at the funeral. I didn't speak either. Leonard wasn't there. I wasn't sure if I felt relieved or furious. Maybe both. Afterward, I found out he'd vanished, packed a bag and disappeared the day she went into the hospital. Left no forwarding address, no trace. I went back to Miss Louise's house with a heart full of questions and a body too tired to hold them. Clara sat with me on the porch that evening. "You're free now," she said. I looked at her and realized I had no idea what that meant, because freedom, when you've lived in a cage for so long, doesn't feel like flying. It feels like falling. After Mama's funeral, people stopped looking me in the eye. It was like my grief made them uncomfortable, or maybe it was something else, something they sensed but didn't want to touch. Even at church, where comfort was supposed to live, all I got was soft pats on the shoulder and quick nods from people who used to talk too much. I became the girl with the dead mother and the missing stepfather, the girl who'd been through too much. They didn't ask, and I didn't offer. Miss Louise let me stay. She didn't say how long, just said, "You got a room here till you figure it out." I started helping more around the house, cooking, hanging laundry, walking to the market with her list tucked in my pocket. Some days she'd talk my ear off. Others, we'd sit in silence and shell peas. Her presence was steady. She never tried to mother me, just let me exist in the space she carved out for me. School was harder. People stared when they thought I wasn't looking. Whispers followed me down hallways like shadows. I heard the word Leonard slip from someone's mouth once near my locker. I froze, but no one ever said anything directly. The silence around him was louder than any rumor. Even teachers seemed unsure how to treat me. Too cautious, too careful, like I might break. I didn't break, but I cracked, slowly, in ways no one could see. Clara was the only one who acted normal. She still laughed at dumb jokes and told me stories about her older brothers getting caught sneaking out. She made me feel human again, not just a survivor with a sad past. One afternoon, she handed me a notebook. "Write it down," she said. "Whatever it is, just get it out of your head." I tried. I wrote a page, then another. Then I ripped them up and threw them in the trash. The words didn't help. They made it worse. Seeing them on paper made it feel too real. I preferred keeping it caged where no one, not even me, could reach it too easily. I started having trouble sleeping again. The nightmares came back. Twisted images, heavy footsteps, that grin. Some nights I'd wake up sweating, clawing at the sheets, convinced Leonard was standing in the doorway. But it was always just shadows, nothing more. One night I woke up gasping, heart racing. I sat up, looked around. The room was quiet, but the feeling didn't go away. Something felt wrong. I got out of bed, tiptoed to the window, pulled back the curtain just enough to see the street. A car was parked across the road. A beat-up Chevy, blue with rust patches near the wheel wells, headlights off, engine silent. I stared at it for what felt like forever. Then it pulled away. No sound, just disappeared into the night like smoke. The next morning, I told Miss Louise. She didn't ask questions. She called the sheriff. He came by, took notes, asked if I recognized the car. I said no. I lied. I knew that car. Leonard had driven it for years, but I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. I started walking different routes to school, avoided alleys, watched every corner. I told Clara I was just being cautious, but she saw the tension in my shoulders. She didn't press, just walked with me, always staying on the side closest to the street like some kind of human shield. A week passed. No more sightings. I told myself maybe it wasn't him, maybe it was coincidence, maybe grief was twisting my memories. Then, one afternoon, I got home and found something on the porch, a single rose. No note, no vase, just the flower, lying across the step like it had been placed there gently. I stared at it until Miss Louise came out and picked it up. Her mouth tightened. Inside, now. She locked the doors, pulled all the curtains, sat me down in the kitchen, and looked me square in the eyes. "You tell me right now, Thelma, was that him?" I nodded, couldn't say the name, just nodded. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just stood, pulled the rotary phone from the wall and plugged it back in. She called the sheriff again. This time, her voice shook. He came back within the hour, took the rose, wrote a report, promised to increase patrol around the neighborhood, but I saw it in his face. He didn't think it would matter. I stopped going to school after that. Miss Louise said she'd figure something out, maybe homeschooling, but I knew the real reason. She didn't want me walking those streets alone anymore, and I didn't argue. That night, I packed a suitcase, just in case. I didn't know where I'd go, but I needed to be ready. I kept the hammer under my pillow again. Old habits. They come back when fear does. Miss Louise started sleeping in the living room, shotgun across her lap. Said it was just until things calmed down. We both knew they wouldn't, and somewhere deep down, I stopped waiting for someone else to protect me. because if Leonard was back, it meant one thing: he wasn't done. Days began to stretch, long and silent, the kind of silence that suffocates more than it soothes. Miss Louise kept her schedule, waking early, humming gospel under her breath, but her eyes never stopped scanning the windows. Every time a car passed, her fingers twitched toward the curtains. I tried to pretend it was just precaution, but I knew. We both knew. Clara came by less often. Not because she didn't care. I think she felt helpless. And there's nothing harder than watching someone you love live in fear you can't fix. Once she left a basket of cookies on the porch with a note. Still here, always will be. I cried reading it, but I didn't open the front door. I started eating less, sleeping less. The rose had done something to me. It wasn't a gift, it was a message. Leonard wanted me to know he was close, that he could get even closer. He wasn't just haunting me, he was hunting. Then one night the phone rang. Miss Louise answered like always, calm, polite, but after a second she went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came. I saw her hand tremble before she dropped the receiver onto the floor. I rushed to her, picked it up. No voice on the other end, just breathing, deep, slow, familiar. I slammed the phone down and backed away like it might reach out and grab me. Miss Louise locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sat on the couch like her legs had given up. He was taunting us now. I didn't sleep that night. Sat by the window, hammer across my lap, staring out into the dark. I thought about running again, leaving town, changing my name, but deep down, I knew something had shifted. Running wasn't enough anymore, not while he was still breathing the same air. A week later, I got a letter. No return address, just my name, written in that tight, slanted print I recognized instantly. Inside, no words, just a photograph. Me, taken from across the street, through a window. I was at the kitchen table, head down, arms folded. Unaware, my stomach turned. I dropped the photo like it burned. Miss Louise called the sheriff again. This time, they sent someone to sit out front for a few hours. That was all they could do. No threats, no violence, just a flower and a photo. Not enough for a warrant, not enough for justice. I knew then what he was doing. He was waiting for me to crack, for fear to paralyze me, for the past to swallow me whole so he wouldn't have to lift a finger. But I wasn't 12 anymore. The next morning, I went into town. Miss Louise begged me not to. I told her I just needed 1 hour. She handed me a pocket knife before I left, pressed it into my hand like it was holy. I nodded, tucked it into my coat. I walked to the pawn shop, bought a burner phone, then to the hardware store, gloves, rope, flashlight. Nobody asked questions. It's easy to be invisible when you're a teenage girl in a small town. People assume weakness. That night I didn't sleep either, but not from fear. I was thinking, planning, going over every detail in my head like a ritual, over and over, until it felt like breathing. By the weekend, I was ready. I waited until Miss Louise was asleep, shotgun leaning on the wall, snoring gently under her quilt. I left her a note, just 3 words, "Don't come looking." I took the flashlight, the phone, the hammer, the gloves. The knife stayed in my pocket. I walked toward the last place he'd ever expect me to go, the church. It hadn't changed. Still that chipped white building with the broken bell and sagging steps. Leonard had preached there every Sunday, like sin had never touched his shadow. I circled behind it, heart thudding so loud I swore the ground could hear. The back door was loose. I'd known that for years. I slipped inside, past the nursery, past the creaking hallway with the water-stained ceiling, straight to his old office. The air smelled like mildew and paper. Nothing had been touched in months. A layer of dust on the desk, but the drawer opened easy. I knew it would, and inside was what I came for, the address. I don't know why I believed he was stupid enough to leave it behind. Maybe I hoped. Maybe I knew a part of him was arrogant enough to think no one would dare look. But it was there, on a torn envelope, scribbled fast. An apartment complex 2 towns over. My hands shook. It was real. He was real. Alive, breathing, waiting. I left the church before dawn. Didn't look back. By the time the sun rose, I was gone too. The bus ride was long, the kind that gives you too much time to think. I stared out the window for hours, watching towns blur into each other, telephone poles slicing the sky like scars. I didn't bring much, just a change of clothes, the address folded in my pocket, and the hammer wrapped tight in an old flannel shirt. Everything else stayed behind, including the girl who used to flinch every time someone raised their voice. I didn't tell Clara, didn't call Miss Louise. I couldn't, not until I finished what I started. They'd try to stop me, try to reason with me. But some things can't be reasoned with. Some wounds don't heal until they're cauterized. When I got off the bus, the air felt thicker, dirtier. This town was different, bigger. People walked faster, talked less. No one noticed me. A girl in a hoodie with a backpack. That was the plan. Be nobody. The address led to a rundown complex near the edge of town. 3 stories of peeling paint, rusted stairwells, and windows with blinds half closed like they were ashamed to be open. I stood across the street and counted the units. His was on the 2nd floor. Number 2B. The curtains were drawn. No movement, no light. I watched for hours. Sunset came. Streetlights flickered on. I waited. Around 9, I saw him. He stepped out onto the balcony like he didn't have a single thing to fear. Same walk, same posture, just older. His hair had gone grey around the edges, and he moved slower. But it was him. I'd know that silhouette anywhere. He lit a cigarette, sat on a plastic chair, looked out at the parking lot like it was his kingdom. I didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. When he finished, he went back inside. The light in the living room flicked on for a moment, then off again. I waited another hour before walking away. I didn't go far. Found a cheap motel down the block. Paid cash. The woman behind the counter didn't even ask for ID. Room smelled like bleach and cigarettes, but I didn't care. I laid on the bed and stared at the ceiling, rehearsing every possibility in my head. The next day, I watched again. Same routine. He went out in the morning, came back with groceries, talked to no one. Always alone. I followed once, from a distance, just to be sure. He didn't recognize me, or maybe he did and pretended not to. Either way, he never looked over his shoulder, like he believed he'd won. On the 3rd day, I got closer. I waited until he left, then approached the building. No one stopped me. No one even looked. His door was old, the kind you could open with the right kind of pressure if you knew where to push. I learned that a long time ago. Back when I used to sneak into locked rooms in our own house, trying to find where Mama hid the money. I didn't go in, just wanted to see if I could. I could. That night, I sat in the motel, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. The hammer lay on the bed beside me, wrapped in the same shirt. I reached for the burner phone and typed a message to Clara, but deleted it before sending. I couldn't bring her into this. I didn't sleep. My body was too full of noise. My head buzzed with every second I'd lived in that house, every time I couldn't breathe, every time his hand had pressed where it never should have. Morning came like a punch. I dressed in silence, pulled my hair back, slipped the hammer into the backpack, the gloves into my coat pocket, took the stairs 2 at a time. The hallway outside his door was silent. I knocked. Once, then again. No answer. I tested the knob. It turned. The door opened, and there he was, standing in the kitchen. He looked up, eyes met mine, and for a split second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, like he was happy to see me. He didn't look surprised. That smile on his face wasn't joy. It was ownership, like I was something misplaced, and he was relieved to find me again. My hands were sweating inside the coat pockets. I could feel the edge of the gloves, smooth and ready. The hammer weighed heavy in my backpack, pressing into my spine like a secret begging to be used. But I didn't move. I stood there, watching his every breath. "Well, well," he said, leaning on the counter like we were old friends catching up. "Look at you." My voice didn't come. It was there, curled in my throat like a fist, but it wouldn't rise. I stared at him, took in every line on his face, every crack in his skin, every inch of that body I once feared more than death itself. And still, somehow, he acted like he was in control. "I figured you'd come eventually," he continued. "Knew you couldn't stay away forever." I took a step forward, not because I wanted to, but because if I stood still any longer, I'd shatter. His eyes followed the motion, curious, not alarmed. "You gonna say anything? Or just keep staring?" he asked, voice light, almost teasing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gloves, slipped them on slowly, never breaking eye contact. That wiped the grin off his face. "You think this is some kind of movie, huh?" he muttered. "What, you come here to scare me? Make some big scene?" I dropped the backpack on the floor. He straightened his posture. "Don't be stupid now, Thelma. You don't know what you're doing." I crouched, unzipped the bag, and pulled out the hammer. Held it in both hands. Not raised, just visible. He took a step back. "I never laid a hand on you," he said suddenly. "Not the way you think. Not like you tell people. You've always had a wild imagination. Your mother, she was the one who twisted things." He was rambling, words spilling like oil on a kitchen floor. "I tried to raise you right. I gave you a roof, clothes, school, everything you needed. If I was hard on you, it was for your own good." I didn't answer. "You got no proof?" he said. "No one's going to believe you now. They didn't then, they won't now." Another step back. I took one forward. He turned toward the table, maybe looking for something, maybe just trying to buy time. I moved before he could do anything else. Not with rage, not with screaming, just with a calmness that scared even me. I raised the hammer. He froze. "You gonna kill me?" he asked. "Right here? That who you are now?" I lowered my arm just enough to speak. "Number? That's who you made." Silence filled the room. Thick, heavy. Then he laughed. Short, bitter. "You think this changes anything? You think I haven't been through worse?" I stepped closer. The hammer grazed the edge of the counter. "I'm not here to change you," I said. "I came to end it." He tried to move around me, maybe to the door, maybe to the phone, but I blocked him. I wasn't scared anymore. That part of me had died somewhere between the rose and the photograph. He raised his hands, palms out. "Don't do anything stupid." I tilted my head. "I did something stupid once," I whispered. I stayed quiet. He lunged. It wasn't graceful. He was older now, slower, but still fast enough to make the room spin. I ducked, swung the hammer without thinking. It caught his shoulder. He screamed, stumbled back, hit the edge of the table. I stood over him, breathing hard, arms trembling. He clutched his shoulder, eyes wide, wild. "You're crazy," he spat, "just like your mother." I hit the floor beside him with the hammer. Not him, just the ground. The sound was enough. He flinched like a dog. "You're going to leave me alone," I said. "You're going to disappear again. But this time, if I ever see your shadow again, I won't stop at the floor." He didn't speak. I stood, picked up the backpack, walked to the door. He stayed crumpled, silent, staring at the wall like he'd seen something too big to explain. I left without slamming the door. I didn't need the drama, just the ending. I didn't look back until I turned the corner of the building. My legs felt like they were moving on their own, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the sidewalk, the streetlights looked brighter somehow, like the world had shifted half an inch without telling anyone. I walked fast, almost running, backpack swinging against my spine, the hammer still warm in my grip. My heart hadn't settled. It wasn't panic. It was something else, something electric. My hands shook not from fear, but from everything that had built up inside me all those years finally spilling out, drop by drop, like blood from a wound I'd forgotten was still open. Back at the motel, I locked the door 3 times, closed the curtains, sat on the bed without turning on the light. The room smelled like dust and bleach, and something cheap beneath it all. I dropped the hammer on the floor beside me. It landed with a dull thud. My fingers stayed curled, like they didn't understand yet that it was over, or at least some part of it. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe an hour, maybe more. I stared at the wall until it blurred into nothing. My thoughts didn't form right away. They scattered, slipping through cracks, refusing to land. I wasn't thinking about what I'd done or what he'd said. I was just existing, like someone who'd climbed out of a hole only to realize they didn't know where they were anymore. Eventually, I took off the gloves, folded them neatly, placed them back in the bag. I washed my hands in the tiny motel sink, watched the water swirl down the drain, red mixed with rust. I wasn't sure if the blood was his or mine, or just memory staining the faucet. I didn't care. I scrubbed until my skin turned raw. Only then did I let myself sit again. I thought I'd sleep. I didn't. My eyes closed, but the pictures came fast. His face, that smile, the cigarette on the balcony, the way he looked at me like I still belonged to him. even after all these years. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling instead. The fan spun too slow, like it didn't want to remember either. By morning, I knew I had to go back. Not to the apartment, not to him, to the beginning. I took the first bus out of town, got off near the edge of Little Rock. The streets looked smaller, older, not because they'd changed, but because I had. I walked past the bakery where Mama used to buy day-old bread, past the old schoolyard with the rusted swings. Everything was still there, untouched by time, and yet nothing looked the same. I stopped in front of our old house. The paint was peeling, the yard overgrown, a for sale sign tilted sideways in the front lawn. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the window that used to be mine. I could almost see the younger version of me behind the glass, eyes wide, back pressed to the wall, waiting for footsteps that meant the end of the night wouldn't be quiet. I wanted to go in. I didn't. There was nothing left inside that belonged to me, just air soaked in silence and walls that never told the truth. I turned away and walked to the cemetery. Mama's grave was near the back, under a tree that hadn't grown much since I last saw it. I sat beside the stone. No flowers, no offerings, just my presence and the weight of everything unsaid. I whispered what I could, told her what I'd done, told her why. The words didn't come smooth. They cracked. Some got stuck, but I said them anyway, because even if no one else ever heard it, she needed to. Afterward, I went back to Miss Louise's house. She opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been waiting. Her face didn't change when she saw me, just stepped aside and let me in. I didn't speak, neither did she. I dropped the bag by the stairs and sat on the couch. She made tea. We drank in silence. Only after I finished the second cup did she reach across and place her hand on mine. "I figured you'd do what needed doing," she said. I didn't answer. She squeezed once, then let go. "You're safe now," she added. But the truth is, I didn't feel safe. Not yet. Not really. Because something had changed in me that couldn't be undone. And I still didn't know what that meant. The days that followed moved like syrup. I woke up early. Not because I had somewhere to be, but because my body didn't know how to rest anymore. Miss Louise never asked questions. She just handed me breakfast like always, sat at the table, and read the paper out loud like she had an audience of 10. I nodded when needed, smiled sometimes, but inside I was still somewhere else. At night I lay awake listening to the house breathe. Every creak in the floorboards felt like a memory trying to crawl back up. I kept the burner phone beside me. Dead battery. No signal. I didn't need to call anyone. I just liked knowing it was there. A last thread to that version of me who had stepped into his apartment and walked out alive. But alive isn't always enough. One afternoon, I found myself in the backyard, staring at Mama's old gardening gloves Miss Louise kept in a crate by the shed. They were torn, dirt-stained, worn thin in the fingers. I held them in my hands and tried to remember the last time I'd seen Mama smile. A real smile, not the polite kind she wore when Leonard was around. I couldn't recall. Maybe it had been at the river one summer, before he moved in. Or maybe I made it up to survive. Later that same day, Clara came by. She didn't knock, just walked into the kitchen like always and dropped her bag on the chair. I hadn't told her anything, not the truth, but the way she looked at me, quiet, focused, I think she knew. "You went to see him," she said finally. I didn't respond. "I saw the news," she continued. "Police found a man in an apartment upstate, said he'd been assaulted, no forced entry, no suspects, said he refused to press charges." I raised my eyes to meet hers. "He won't talk," she added. Still, I said nothing. "I'm not asking you to explain. I just needed to know if you're okay." That word, okay, it hit wrong. It always did, because people think okay means clean, healed, fixed. But okay is a bruise that's still purple. It's breathing, but slower. It's not screaming anymore, but not singing either. "I'm not," I whispered. "Not yet." She nodded, didn't push. That night I opened the drawer in Miss Louise's living room and pulled out Mama's Bible. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside, pressed between pages of Psalms, was a photo of her holding me as a baby. Her face looked tired even then, but there was something else in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in myself. I kept the photo, taped it to the wall above the bed. The next morning, I walked to the sheriff's office. Not because I wanted justice. I stopped believing in that a long time ago. I just needed to see if the story was real. The deputy at the desk looked up when I entered. His eyes narrowed like he was trying to place me. I gave him no time. "I heard about a man," I said. "Leonard Pickens." He blinked. "Are you family?" "No." He leaned back. "Well, there was an incident. He's refusing to cooperate. Won't give details. Said he fell, but..." "But?" He hesitated. Guy was terrified, paranoid. Told us someone came back for him. Then clammed up. Won't eat, won't leave the apartment. Keeps the curtains closed. Jumps at shadows. My lips twitched. He kept talking. Something about protocol. I stopped listening. I walked out before he finished the sentence. The air outside felt lighter. Not clean, but lighter. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching people pass, wondering how many of them had secrets in their pockets, how many were walking around, breathing fine, while someone else was barely holding on. You can't tell by looking. Pain doesn't show up like a bruise. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it sits quiet at dinner tables and folds laundry and answers phones in sweet voices. But I could see it now, everywhere. When I got back to the house, Miss Louise had made cornbread. The smell filled the kitchen like home. She didn't say a word, just handed me a plate. We ate in silence. That night, I finally slept. No hammer under the pillow, no knife in my coat, just me and quiet. The days after that were quieter in a way that didn't feel like waiting. They felt earned. I moved slower, not out of fear, but because I was learning how to live without constantly glancing over my shoulder. My body still held tension, like a muscle that forgot how to let go, but it wasn't the same kind of tight. It was the kind that comes after battle, the kind that lingers when the enemy retreats, but the ground is still full of echoes. I helped Miss Louise around the house more without being asked, scrubbed the porch, painted the mailbox, sewed a button back onto her church coat. These things felt like control, small, simple ways of reclaiming space. Clara came by most evenings. Sometimes she talked, sometimes she just sat beside me, both of us staring at nothing. One night she brought a cassette player and a box of tapes. We listened to old gospel songs while eating popcorn, her feet propped on the coffee table, mine curled underneath me like a girl who never left. She didn't mention Leonard again. Neither did I. Some truths don't need repeating. They just sit between two people like weather. Always there, even if you don't name the rain. About a week later, I woke up before sunrise and walked to the edge of town. There's a spot by the creek where the trees split just right, and the wind always seems to move through like it knows where it's going. I sat on the bank and watched the water shift. I thought about Mama, about how she'd hum while cooking, about how her hands were always moving, even when her heart was tired. I wondered if she knew I'd make it out, if she believed I had more inside me than fear. The wind picked up. I closed my eyes. I whispered thank you, to her, to the girl I used to be, even to the silence that taught me how to listen. Back at the house, Miss Louise had made pancakes. She didn't ask where I'd been, just poured syrup and said, "There's coffee on the stove." Some people say healing is like a ladder, one step at a time. I think it's more like a field after a fire. Nothing grows right away, but eventually something green pushes through. Not because it wants to, because it has to. I started writing again. Not about Leonard. Not directly. I wrote about a girl who swallowed thunder and lived through the lightning. I didn't give her a name. Didn't have to. She was mine. I wrote about her in notebooks, on napkins, on the back of receipts. The words didn't hurt anymore. They weren't heavy. They were anchors. Things I could hold to stay grounded when the past came knocking. One afternoon, Clara read a few pages. She didn't say much, just folded them neatly and looked at me with something soft in her eyes. That look stayed with me for days. The sheriff never called again. I never asked what happened to Leonard after that report. I didn't need to. Sometimes I imagined him in that apartment, curtains drawn tight like they could keep out judgment. The windows probably hadn't been opened in years, just thick glass trapping the air, the silence, the ghosts. Maybe he couldn't look at himself anymore. Maybe even the mirror had turned into a punishment, showing him not just his own face, but mine, too. Maybe when he walked past his hallway at night, he paused, thinking he heard the shuffle of footsteps that didn't belong to him. A floorboard creaked and he flinched. A door clicked shut and his heart raced. And maybe, just maybe, he thought of me. Not the child I used to be, but the woman I became, the one who remembers, the one who survived, the one he never broke, no matter how hard he tried. Maybe he woke in cold sweats. Maybe every dream he had ended in silence, followed by a low, deliberate knock at the door. Maybe he heard my voice in the wind, soft and steady, reminding him of what he did. Maybe the weight he carried was the same one he thought he'd buried years ago, except it followed him now, heavy as guilt and twice as loud. Maybe he sat in that apartment, watching the clock tick, counting the hours, waiting for someone to come for him, waiting for the consequences he never thought would arrive, waiting the way I used to, small and afraid and certain no one was coming. Good. One morning, the air smelled different, not fresher but finished, like the end of something old and the beginning of something uncertain. I woke early, before the sun had fully stretched across the sky. I folded a few clothes and placed them neatly into a small suitcase. Not much, just enough. A pair of shoes, a sweater, my notebooks, worn and scuffed, their pages heavy with truth. They'd seen more than most people ever would. They'd held me together on nights when I couldn't remember who I was without the pain. They carried the names, the dates, the things I couldn't say out loud. When Miss Louise saw me by the door, suitcase in hand, she raised an eyebrow, not in judgment, just in curiosity, the kind of look someone gives when they see a bird on the edge of a branch, about to fly. "Where you headed?" she asked, voice warm, eyes soft. "Not far," I said, "just ready to live somewhere that doesn't remind me of everything." She didn't press, didn't ask what everything meant. She already knew. You don't have to explain to someone who's watched you crawl and cry and claw your way through the worst of it. She just stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. Not a polite hug. Not one of those quick, distant things people give to be nice. No, this was the kind of hug that meant something, that wrapped around you like safety, like home, like love that doesn't ask questions. The kind that says, "You're always welcome here, no matter where you go, no matter what you've been through, no matter how long you're gone." Clara showed up not long after. She didn't honk the horn or rush me out. She just waited, leaned against her car like she had all the time in the world. We didn't say much during the drive. Some things don't need words. She knew this wasn't goodbye. Not really. It was just the next part of my story, and she'd already been in enough chapters to understand her place in it. When we got to the bus station, we sat in the car a little longer than we had to. The engine was off. The air was still. People came and went around us, but for a moment, it felt like the whole world had paused. We didn't cry. There weren't any dramatic goodbyes or promises written in tears. We just held hands, a quiet gesture, a final thread, and in that brief moment, I felt everything. Gratitude, sorrow, strength, fear, but above all, peace. A strange kind of peace that doesn't come from knowing what comes next, but from finally letting go of what came before. When I stepped onto the bus, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The past wasn't chasing me anymore. It had its own place, its own weight, and I wasn't carrying it the same way I used to. The road ahead wasn't clear, not even close. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of that. I didn't need a map. I didn't need a destination. I had what mattered. My suitcase, my notebooks, my scars, not hidden, not shameful, just mine. Proof that I had survived. And maybe most important of all, I had my name, not whispered, not buried, not hidden under fear, spoken now with clarity, with defiance, with ownership. My name is Thelma Irene Pickens. I am 79 years old now, and I survived. Not because someone came riding in to save me, not because justice finally knocked on the right door, not because the world suddenly decided to care, but because I stopped waiting. I stopped waiting for anyone to believe me. I stopped hoping someone would do the right thing on my behalf. I stopped whispering. I stopped shrinking. I stood up and I walked out and I chose to live. I stitched myself together with every torn page in those notebooks. I found light in places no one thought to look. I didn't forget, but I forgave myself for not being able to forget. I gave myself permission to move, to speak, to exist beyond the echo of what he did. And that's why I'm still here. because in the end, survival isn't always loud. If you've read this far, go ahead and leave your like, sweetheart, because it's not every day a woman rises from the ground and writes her own freedom.